Emily Thompson stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan apartment, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars against the November darkness. Her reflection stared back at her, showing a woman who seemed to have everything, yet felt utterly empty inside. The sound of keys jingling at the door made her turn as Jack Harlan, her husband of 8 years, walked in without even glancing her way. "Good evening," she said softly, hoping for some acknowledgement of her presence. "Yeah," he muttered already, heading toward the bedroom, his eyes glued to his phone screen. Emily felt the familiar ache in her chest that had become her constant companion over the past 2 years. Their marriage had transformed from passionate young love into nothing more than two strangers sharing an address. She remembered when Jack used to bring her wildflowers from the park, when he would dance with her in the kitchen, when his eyes would light up just seeing her walk into a room. Now there was only silence and routine. Her phone buzzed with a reminder about the corporate gala tonight, an event she had been dreading for weeks. These functions were always the same: fake smiles, shallow conversations, and endless networking that left her feeling more alone than ever. She walked to her closet, pulling out an elegant emerald dress that hugged her curves perfectly. At 32, Emily had maintained her graceful beauty, but lately she wondered if anyone even noticed anymore. Jack emerged from the bedroom in his tuxedo, barely looking at her as he adjusted his bow tie. "Ready?" he asked, checking his watch with obvious impatience. Emily nodded, grabbing her clutch and following him out the door. She had become an expert at pretending everything was fine, at maintaining the illusion of a perfect marriage for the outside world. The ride to the Plaza Hotel was silent, except for the sound of traffic outside their hired car. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel shimmered with crystal chandeliers, and the buzz of New York's elite mingling beneath them. Emily stood alone near the bar, sipping champagne, while Jack disappeared into a crowd of business associates who seemed far more interesting than his own wife. She felt invisible in a room full of hundreds of men. "Excuse me, but I believe you dropped this." Emily turned to find a tall, striking man holding her small clutch purse. His steel blue eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. He wore his tuxedo with effortless elegance, and his dark hair was perfectly styled, yet somehow casual. "Oh, thank you," she stammered, taking the purse from his outstretched hand. "I didn't even realize." "Alexander Reed," he introduced himself, extending his hand with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "I've been watching you stand here alone for the past 10 minutes, and I thought that was a crime against humanity." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Emily Thompson. And I'm not alone. My husband is just somewhere in that crowd." Alexander glanced toward the masses, then back at her, with an expression that said he understood everything without words being spoken. "A husband who leaves a woman like you standing alone doesn't deserve the title." His boldness should have offended her, should have sent her walking away. But instead, Emily felt something awaken inside her that had been dormant for far too long. They talked for what felt like minutes, but turned into hours. Alexander was a billionaire investor who had built his empire from nothing. He spoke passionately about art, travel, philosophy, and dreams with an enthusiasm that was intoxicating. Emily found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in months, sharing stories about her own ambitions that she had buried beneath years of marital disappointment. When Jack finally returned, he barely acknowledged Alexander before telling Emily they were leaving. "It was a pleasure meeting you," Emily Alexander said softly, his eyes holding hers for a moment too long. Part 3. The Forbidden Choice. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Alexander's face haunted her thoughts, his words echoing in her mind like a song she couldn't forget. She lay beside Jack, who snored peacefully, unaware that his wife's heart was already drifting away from him. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "I know I shouldn't, but I can't stop thinking about you. Coffee tomorrow, Alexander." Emily stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should delete it, block the number, and forget this dangerous attraction. But her heart, that broken, neglected heart, begged for something different. She typed back, "Yes." They met at a small cafe in Greenwich Village, far from the circles where either might be recognized. Alexander was waiting at a corner table, his smile brightening when he saw her approach. "I'm married," she blurted out as soon as she sat down, needing to acknowledge the elephant in the room. "I know," he replied gently, "and I'm not here to destroy your marriage, Emily. I'm here because I met someone extraordinary, and I couldn't let her disappear without knowing if she felt what I felt." She did feel it, and that terrified her more than anything. What they shared over coffee turned into a walk through Central Park, which turned into dinner at a quiet restaurant, which turned into weeks of secret meetings. Emily told herself they were just friends, but she knew she was lying. Each conversation pulled her further from Jack and deeper into Alexander's orbit. She learned that Alexander had lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago, that he had built his fortune to honor her memory, but had been empty inside until now. One evening, Alexander invited her to see his private art collection in his penthouse suite. Emily knew she shouldn't go, knew that crossing that threshold would change everything forever, but she went anyway. The penthouse suite overlooked the Manhattan skyline in a way that made Emily feel like she was floating above the world. Alexander poured wine as they walked through rooms filled with masterpieces, but Emily could barely focus on the art when every fiber of her being was aware of his presence beside her, breathing shakily. "This Monet reminded me of you," he said softly, standing behind her as they gazed at a painting of water lilies, beautiful, complex, and deserving of being truly seen. Emily turned to face him, and in that moment all pretense shattered. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers for permission. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his lips inches from hers. "Tell me this is wrong, and I'll walk away forever." But Emily couldn't say those words. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him with a passion that had been buried for years. Gasping, what followed was a night of intense connection that went beyond physical desire. It was two souls recognizing each other after lifetimes of searching. They talked until dawn, wrapped in sheets and vulnerability. Alexander traced patterns on her shoulder as Emily finally admitted the truth she had been hiding from herself. "I don't love Jack anymore," she confessed, crying softly. "I don't know if I ever loved him the way I should have. We were high school sweethearts who never grew up together. We just grew apart." Alexander held her tighter. "You deserve to be happy, Emily. You deserve to be with someone who sees your light." As the sun rose over the city, Emily felt clarity wash over her like cold water. She had betrayed her vows, had become someone she never thought she would be. But she had also discovered that living a lie was worse than any sin, trembling with resolve. "I have to go," she said suddenly, gathering her clothes. "I have to end this properly." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be here waiting, no matter how long it takes." Part 5. The Vanishing Queen. Emily arrived home as Jack was making coffee in their kitchen, still wearing last night's makeup and evening dress. The sight of her made him pause mid-pour. "Where have you been?" he asked, but his tone suggested he didn't really care to know the answer. Emily walked to their bedroom, retrieved the divorce papers she had secretly prepared weeks ago, and signed them with steady hands, jaw set with determination. She packed a single suitcase with essentials, grabbed her passport and emergency cash she had been saving. When she returned to the kitchen, Jack was scrolling through his phone, oblivious. She placed the signed papers on the marble counter beside his coffee mug. "I'm done," she said simply. "These are divorce papers. They're signed and ready. You can have everything, the apartment, the cars, the life we built. I just want my freedom." Jack looked up startled, finally really seeing her for the first time in years, eyes widening. "Emily, what are you talking about? Where are you going?" "Somewhere I can finally breathe," she replied, voice steady and strong. "I've been drowning in this marriage, Jack, and you never even noticed. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. Wait, we can talk about this. We can fix this." Jack stammered, panic creeping into his voice. Emily shook her head. "There's nothing left to fix. I'm not the woman you married, and you're not the man I needed you to be. We both deserve better than this empty shell of a relationship." She walked toward the door as Jack called after her, making promises he should have made years ago, ignoring his pleas. Emily didn't look back. She drove to the airport, bought a one-way ticket to San Diego, and disappeared. Hours later, she was standing on a quiet beach in a small coastal town called Seabreeze Cove, watching waves crash against the shore, breathing freely. Over the following months, Emily reinvented herself. She dyed her hair, started using her middle name Claire, and found work at a local bookstore. The townspeople knew her as a quiet, mysterious woman who had come seeking peace. Jack searched for her, desperately hiring private investigators, checking with friends and family, but Emily had vanished completely. She occasionally received encrypted messages from Alexander, who respected her need for space, but reminded her that his heart remained hers. As Emily watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, she reflected on everything she had learned, peaceful smile. She had discovered that sometimes love isn't enough without respect, attention, and genuine partnership. She learned that staying in a comfortable prison is still imprisonment. She understood now that betrayal begins long before an affair, when two people stop fighting for each other and simply exist side by side. Most importantly, Emily learned that she was her own queen, and no crown meant anything if she had to sacrifice her soul to wear it, standing tall against the ocean breeze. The forbidden night had shattered her marriage, but it had also shattered the chains that bound her to a life half-lived. She was finally free, and that freedom was worth every consequence, every sleepless night, every moment of guilt. Because Emily Thompson had vanished, but Claire had been reborn from the ashes, ready to write her own story on her own terms forever.